Great, thank you very much, Alan. I'd like to very warmly welcome you all to this webinar on the new Visitor Use Management Framework, or the VUM. And this is part 2 of a series of webinars, which is being co-hosted by the IUCN WCPA Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group in partnership with the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council and Ecoturismo Genuino. And today we have 2 excellent speakers. We have Rose Verbos from the National Park Service and also Karin Vidala from the US Forest Service, who are going to be speaking about the VUM to us. And I would like to introduce to you the Tourism and Protected Areas Specialist Group, and just as a brief introduction. Can I have the next slide, please, Alan? So our vision is really to have a future where tourism in protected areas has a positive impact on biodiversity, and where tourism is environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable. Next, please. And our group is one of several specialist groups under the World Commission on Protected Areas, and we have about over 420 volunteer members globally who are committed to promoting sustainable tourism in protected areas. And we provide a forum where people can collaborate and stimulate dialogue, share expertise, and develop and disseminate knowledge on this subject. So we aim to provide strategic advice to governments and others on how to optimize approaches towards sustainable tourism in natural areas. Next slide, please. This is how our EXCO looks at the moment. So we have, I chair the group, and we have a series of thematic groups on communities and heritage, biodiversity, and economics. And we also have cross-sectional leads on knowledge development and capacity building. So Tiago Souza, who is our capacity building coordinator, for example, who's helped convene this meeting. And then we have support groups on membership and communication, and an IUCN focal point. And Ron Madder will be joining us shortly. He'll be helping to wrap up the meeting later on. Next, please. So some of the kind of activities that we do include knowledge development and dissemination. So we help to develop best practice guidelines and convene special editions of journals and other materials. Next, please. And we also try and convene groups to build capacity among protected area managers and others on tourism in protected areas. Next, please. Okay, and have various network meetings. So we've just had a series of meetings on tourism concessions in protected areas, for example, in Southern Africa. Next, please. Here are a series of online links where you can find more information out about the TAPAS group, and our membership application is at the top if you'd like to consider joining. Next. And I'd just like to do a very small plug for a sustainable tourism conference that we're hosting here in the Seychelles in November, if some of you would like to come and spend some time in the beach discussing sustainable tourism. We have an extended call for papers until the middle of July, so if you're interested in contributing, please let me know. And with that, I would like to pass over to Susan, who will introduce the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council and our 2 speakers. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna. This is Carrie Cahill, and I chair the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. And I'm really excited to introduce 2 of my council colleagues, Rose Verbos and Karin Vidala, who will be presenting their case studies today on how they've applied the recently released Visitor Use Management Framework that was developed by the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. Rose is, as Anna said, with the National Park Service, and Karin is with the Forest Service, so you'll be hearing 2 different case study presentations. In addition, a couple of weeks ago, my colleague Susan McPartlin and I presented, and she presented another case study, Park Service case study, that's also available on the video link if anyone's interested in that 3rd case study as well. I'm going to start off the presentation with just going over a few of the introduction slides that I covered on the first presentation that we did a couple of weeks ago, just in case if you weren't on the first webinar. And I'll just be sharing a little bit of information about the Council and the Visitor Use Management Framework. Next slide. So I want to start off with talking a little bit about the importance of visitor use management. We're really in an exciting time, particularly here in the United States, with many current initiatives to encourage access and people's connections to public lands and waters. With this encouragement of access, there's really a corresponding need to heighten our agency's proactive and thoughtful approach to how we manage use in a sustainable way. By really proactively planning for visitor use, we can encourage access, improve visitor experiences, and protect resources and values. Next slide. I wanted to share a little bit about the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. This is a group of 6 federal agencies that have come together to work on different aspects of how we sustainably manage visitor use on public lands and waters. The Council was formed in 2011 to provide guidance on long-term visitor use management policies and give direction on the most pressing needs by helping build technical competencies and improve interagency coordination amongst the 6 federal agencies that manage recreation in the U.S. To date, the Council has accomplished a number of their activities, including producing 2 position papers, one on visitor use management and one on visitor capacity. Those are both available on our website, which is on the screen there at the bottom. We also developed a visitor use management framework, and that'll be the focus of today's presentation. That framework will be shared by the 6 agencies and builds on lessons learned from implementing past frameworks, and I'll touch on that a bit more in a minute. That framework document is also available on our website. We have 2 additional guidebooks in development, one on monitoring and one on visitor capacity. These provide additional details for those 2 very important steps of the framework. Those are in draft right now and being circulated for review internally, and we hope to have those available and on the website within the next year. We're also working on training, which will provide all of this guidance in a more easily accessible format, starting with online training, and we are working, that's in progress right now. Next slide. So now I'd like to just talk a little bit more about the framework, which is a process that's designed for federal managers to collaboratively develop, implement, and monitor strategies and actions to really help connect visitors with their public lands and waters. The intent of the framework and the ultimate desired outcome is to provide high-quality visitor experiences while also protecting natural and cultural resources. So this framework has 4 core elements that will be shared by the different agencies, starting off with building the foundation, really understanding the purpose of an area and why it exists, and then building on that with defining visitor use management direction, really clarifying desired conditions and goals for an area, moving then into identifying management strategies that help us achieve those desired conditions. And then the last element is doing a continual step of implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and adjustment. And all of that continues to feed back into the framework of building the foundation and defining direction. It's very much an iterative process that continues over time. Universal to all of the elements and steps of the framework are law and agency policy, and also the concept of the sliding scale, which I'll explain more in just a minute. And then lastly, public involvement, ensuring that there's good engagement with the public and our stakeholders throughout the process. Next slide. So many of you may be familiar with some of the past frameworks that the agencies developed to help guide how we manage visitor use and recreation. The Limits of Acceptable Change system for wilderness planning, which was developed by the U.S. Forest Service, and also the Visitor Experience and Resource Protection Framework developed by the National Park Service are just two examples of some of the past frameworks. This new framework really builds on those past frameworks. It takes the best, and there was a lot of great guidance in those past frameworks, and incorporates lessons learned from implementing those frameworks over the last several decades. So we've learned a lot from implementing those, and now we've developed this new framework to integrate those lessons learned and new guidance. Some of the changes were to integrate the concept of a sliding scale to really show how the frameworks could be used in a whole variety of different situations. Also emphasizing that these frameworks can be used, that the new framework can be used in all types of settings and opportunities. We've also clearly identified where visitor capacity fits within the larger visitor use management framework. And we provided consistent terminology and definitions that now all 6 federal agencies will share as they implement the new framework. And the new framework was really developed to be integrated into all of the different agencies' planning procedures so that it could be flexibly applied across all 6 federal agencies. Next slide. I wanted to share a little bit more about the sliding scale, given how important it is to the implementation of the framework. The sliding scale is used to ensure that the investment of time, money, and other resources for the particular project is commensurate with the complexity of the project and the consequences of the decision. So issues with clearly small impacts will usually require less depth and breadth of analysis than those impacts with greater significance. Throughout the framework, we've really emphasized that the sliding scale is used in each element of the framework. So in other words, the process does not vary with project complexity, rather the investment of time and resources varies. This was a really important lesson learned from the past framework implementation. We need a framework that can be used across all settings and situations, from in the field conversations to more complex planning projects, and that in order for the framework to be most helpful, it needed to have that flexibility in application. So throughout the framework document, we've provided many examples of how the framework can be applied across that sliding scale. You'll also hear from Rose and Karen today about how their projects fit on the sliding scale and how that guided their implementation of the project and use of the framework. There are several criteria that help you determine where you land on the sliding scale, and those include the complexity of the issues, the risk of impacts to visitor experiences and resources, the level of stakeholder interest in the issues, and also the potential controversy and possibility for litigation. All of those help inform where you might land on the sliding scale. Next slide. So the visitor use management framework, as I mentioned, had these 4 key elements: the why, what, how, and do. And you see within each of these elements, there are several steps that help you walk through the specific elements and move through the whole framework. Although these are presented in a linear order, every project may require some different ways of moving through this process, and typically, oftentimes, as you move through, you may need to take some steps back as you learn more and move through again. So it's very iterative in nature, as I mentioned before. I'm not going to go through these steps in great detail. Rose and Karen are going to be sharing more about each of the elements and steps as it relates to their case studies. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rose, who's going to talk about her case study at Petroglyph National Monument, and then Karen will follow with her case study on the Pike National Forest.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you all so much. I'm excited to be here today again. My name is Rose Burbis, and I work for the National Park Service. I'm a visitor use project specialist, and I work on a variety of projects all throughout the national park system. And today I'm going to be talking about a project at Petroglyph National Monument. It's a visitor use management plan, and we'll be talking through what Carrie just described, how we're implementing the visitor use management framework in this specific project. So Petroglyph National Monument is located in the western edge of New Mexico's largest metropolitan area in Albuquerque and within the state's most populous county. You can see the monument has an incredibly interesting shape if you look just at the boundary. The boundary follows an escarpment that leads to a mesa top, and north, as you travel along the monument boundary, it follows through several neighborhoods where those developments are encroaching on monument boundaries. From 2000 to 2015, the population in Albuquerque grew by about 21%, and the monument is located almost entirely within the city boundaries. So that increase in population in the city was felt at the monument as well. Petroglyph is cooperatively managed by the National Park Service and the City of Albuquerque Open Space, which is an incredibly unique situation and provides a lot of opportunities for management of the monument as well as the city open space. So National Monument visitation represents about 8% of total visitation at the National Park Service. That goes to about 24 million visitors in 2015. I think it's interesting to think about that in the landscape of all national park visitation. That's only slightly behind national historical units and parkways. And then from there, thinking about just visitation in New Mexico national parks, there was about 1.7 million recreation visits in 2015, and Petroglyph represents about 7% of New Mexico's national park visitation. The chart you can see on the screen is really interesting given Petroglyph's unique monthly visitation trends. While most of our national park units see typical peaks in visitation over the summer months, Petroglyph certainly sees that, as well as a particular spike in October and November when the city of Albuquerque hosts their annual International Balloon Fiesta, which is an incredibly wonderful time to be in the city and visiting the monument. The consistency in visitation at Petroglyph is likely due to two primary factors. The first is the large percentage of visitor use that's contributed from their regular visitors of the local neighborhood, all those homes you saw that are right up next to the boundary. And then second, the weather conditions nearby in Albuquerque make it desirable during more typically cool seasons in other parts of the United States. So it extends their visitation into what we would typically think of as shoulder seasons in October, November, and into the winter months. As Carrie just mentioned, the sliding scales analysis was incredibly important to this project, and we considered it at every step along the way. The issue complexity, while this is a visitor use management plan in title, it's effectively a trails plan where we're establishing a trail system throughout the monument. The issues are clearly stated, and the ability to complete designating a trail system is fairly certain. There are no surprises that we anticipated at the onset of this project. The risk to resources and visitor experiences is fairly moderate since the trail system exists through a series of historic ranch roads, military roads, informal trails, and these trails just need to be formalized. Stakeholder involvement is also moderate. The alternative options for the trail system throughout the park include two primary solutions, one a comprehensive multi-use trail and one a pedestrian-only trail access. The local chapter of the International Mountain Biking Association is very interested and involved in the project. They've been an active contributor in our public meetings, and so our stakeholder involvement is moderate, as well as our level of controversy with varying opinions about what should and shouldn't be done at Petroglyph. And given the irreplaceable nature of the resources and the tribal groups, there's a moderate level of potential for controversy there. And so overall, on the sighting field analysis, Petroglyph National Monument and the project, the Visitor Use Management Plan, fell in the moderate range. When we start at element 1 and talk about why and start to build the foundation for why we need this project and this plan at Petroglyph, we thought through desired conditions for the visitor experiences and the resources, as well as tried to get an understanding of how visitor use is influencing the achievement of those goals and desired conditions, as well as talking through adaptive management and monitoring of visitor use. Public involvement occurred throughout the project. We had a very robust public involvement, 2 public meetings in Albuquerque last September. The park staff have continually held meetings with City Open Space because they are a partnership park. That ongoing conversation is incredibly important to the monument and City Open Space managers. As well, Petroglyph National Monument has incredible cultural significance. Many tribes from across the United States believe that their origins came from within the monument boundaries. There are 3 volcanoes, and one of them is specifically is believed to be the origination of several tribal groups. And so Pueblo and tribal consultation has been incredibly important with such significance within the boundaries. So consultations occurred last September. 7 Pueblos and tribes, over 30 individuals. It was the largest consultation meeting that the park has ever had. So real success in making sure that we genuinely collaborate and gather our stakeholder involvement. And the park continues to meet with the Pueblos and tribes as requested from them. While we were building the foundation, it was important to establish our purpose. And the purpose of this plan, as I mentioned before, is to establish and formalize a trail system to manage public use within the monument. The trail network and activities will be compatible with the park's purpose, significance, and legislation that established the monument. Also, given the cultural significance, part of the purpose was to ensure that cultural and traditional uses and values were integrated into the planning and decision-making process. Next, as a part of step 2 and element 1, we reviewed the area's purpose, applicable legislation, agency policy, as well as other management direction. Petroglyph has a draft foundation document with fundamental resources and values and significance statements, and all of that played a vital role in establishing the foundation for this plan. In addition, in 2010 and 2013, there were 2 versions of a visitor use management plan that were started and never fully completed. Part of the reason that those 2 documents were never completed was because the park staff and superintendents and regional leadership didn't feel like the public had been appropriately engaged through those processes. So it's been very important to do robust public involvement during this project effort and to genuinely do that as well. So we reviewed both of those plans. We didn't want any of that work to be lost, as well as the 1997 GMP. As a part of step 3, we assessed and summarized the existing information and current conditions at Petroglyph. That includes TRAPAC's trail counters that they have out to get numbers of people on the trails. So those are infrared trail counters. At Petroglyph, we also had access to Strava data. Strava is a crowdsourced data that you can, it's anonymously stripped of people's individual identities, and it can be aggregated to activity types, trail segments, and demographics as well. And we considered this as one part of the picture of what's happening in the current conditions. And you can see an image of the Strava Metro heat map on the screen as well. part of what we're always trying to think about in these projects is how to visualize these existing conditions. And so you can see in 1935 what the development looked like, in 1975, and in 2014 as development just moves forward towards the boundaries. Part of summarizing the existing conditions is trying to figure out how to display this best to paint the picture of what's happening with visitation trends. We also summarize the visitor experience. It's incredibly unique within the region as an urban park experience. The collaboration with Albuquerque's open space provides opportunities for solitude, low impact forms of recreation. Visitors and the urban community can hike, explore open space, study and photograph petroglyphs, view the night skies, and many others. As with many park units and public and protected areas in the United States, as visitation continues to increase, there's a variety of issues that result, and summarizing the existing condition can allow us to understand those issues and how they're related to increases in visitation. There's a real need for the monument to create an established and formalized trail system, because their current trail system is this extensive network of historic ranch and military roads, maintenance roads, social trails. And so there's a need for not just a trail system, but a sustainable trail system. The increase in visitation has also resulted in conflicts between types of visitor use. There was hiking, mountain biking, and dog walking all in the same areas, as well as balancing that with the monument's mission to protect resources and provide a quality visitor experience. The residents from the adjacent communities, as you can imagine if you yourself lived near a national park unit, desire access to the monument. And as a result of that, there have been social trails, a number of them leaving from these different houses and neighborhood communities. Those have resulted in erosion and the risk of damage to the archaeological resources. Access points to the trail system have the need to be improved, as well as combined, and identify appropriate locations for those. Rather than 7 originating from one neighborhood, there might just be a need for 1 within a half a mile walking distance from people's homes. And there's the opportunities to link Albuquerque's city open space trails with the monument trails. And those are some of the trends and resulting issues we considered as a part of that step 3. We developed a project action plan. Many of the issues I just discussed and plan need to establish a comprehensive sustainable trail, enhance and expand visitor opportunities, address access, wayfinding, circulation, and design connected to those, promote stewardship of the park's natural and cultural resources in this changing environment with increasing visitation, identify and evaluate various visitor use management strategies, prioritize strategies for protecting sensitive resources, and at petroglyphs, the irreplaceable petroglyphs, and identify priorities for allocating operational resources. Next, element 2, define visitor use management direction, really defining the what of this project. And at petroglyphs, the visitor use management plan has goals and objectives for each area. And for example, in one of the high use areas where visitor use is highly concentrated in a tight area, the goal that park staff developed for that area was to provide visitors with close contact with the resources. They wanted visitors to have guided learning opportunities in a fully developed setting with ADA access. And then from that goal, we can define appropriate visitor activities, facilities, and services. So the city of Albuquerque manages the parking lot there. Because we want a fully developed ADA accessible area, we need to have facilities and services that commiserate with that goal for this highly concentrated area. Also, as a part of defining appropriate visitor activities and facilities, we developed potential management strategies. And this, what you're viewing on the screen right now, is the current conditions at the monument. This is the complex, comprehensive, kind of confusing network of trails that exist at the monument right now. And you can see that's less than ideal, and visitors could go a variety of places and not really be sure that there was any loop or that they could get back to where they parked their vehicle. The next option that you're seeing on this screen is an option for a comprehensive multi-use trail that would include mountain biking, hiking, jog walking, and pedestrian use. There's consolidated access points, there's clear trail systems, there's access that leads from neighborhoods. And then the next option is a pedestrian-only option. So considering the cultural significance of the volcanoes that are on the leftmost part of the monument's boundary, there's an option for pedestrian-only use as well. These alternatives have been developed and they've been presented to the public. The public has had opportunity to comment on them, as well as holding tribal meetings with BSC cultural experts, local tribal leaders, Petroglyph National Monument staff, and then the public scoping online as well. Also, as a part of defining visitor use management direction, we held a workshop to identify and establish indicators and thresholds, as well as visitor capacity we'll talk about in a minute. And you can see the chart on the right-hand side is just an example of visitor-created trail indicator and associated thresholds. For this particular project at Petroglyph, they developed 7 indicators and thresholds that matched their goals and desired conditions for several of the areas. So for example, solitude and natural quiet is incredibly important in 2 areas of the monument, specifically where visitors have the ability to hike back a trail and experience solitude and natural quiet in very close proximity to an urban environment. So really unique for that setting, and that was an important condition to be able to monitor and track over time. So there's an indicator and threshold associated with that. And moving into element 3, identify management strategies, the real how we're going to accomplish this work. We compared and documented the differences between existing and desired conditions. So this is a part of compiling the planning document, the full version of how all this fits together. Also identifying visitor use management strategies and how we're going to achieve those goals and desired conditions. So those were developing the alternatives, collecting the public comments. And then also during element 3 is where we discussed visitor capacity, and we identified visitor capacity for the majority of the high use areas within the park, and all of the visitor capacity identification was related to the goals and objectives for that area. So in areas where we want solitude and natural quiet, there's likely less people we're going to be seeing in that area. And so this is where the project team is at right now. We're working through the process of completing these steps and compiling all of this together. And this will be presented out to regional leadership, and the public will have an opportunity to comment on the entire plan in the fall of this year, I believe. And that concludes my presentation on Petroglyph National Monument. I believe, Karen, I will pass it to you next.
If Rose could still be the presenter. That would be great. Thank you. So my name is Karen Badala, and I was a member of the team on this Bear Creek Watershed Restoration Project to provide consistency with planning and compliance related to law and policy. And so a lot of the credit on this project goes to the whole team that was working on it, the collaborators that we worked with, collaboration group, and the district employees that are currently implementing the project and will be doing the monitoring along with other partners. And since then, I've moved on, and so now I no longer work for this forest. I'm on the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky, and I am the forest planner here. So if there's any mountain climbers out there and you have a chance to visit the Daniel Boone National Forest, I highly recommend the Red River Gorge area. and look me up if you do come out here. So the greenback cutthroat trout is Colorado's state fish. This was on the Pike National Forest in Colorado, and I'll show you a map in just a minute. And historically, the fish was thought to have occupied the Arkansas and South Platte River watersheds. However, recent genetic analysis indicates it naturally occurred only in the South Platte River watershed. Greenback cutthroat trout is a federally listed threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, but extensive surveys have failed to identify any surviving greenback cutthroat trout in the South Platte watershed. So at present, the sole known remaining genetically pure population of greenback cutthroat trout inhabits Bear Creek, a tributary of Fountain Creek, and itself a tributary of the Arkansas River. So they didn't naturally occur in this creek. They were actually placed there and transplanted there earlier in the 1900s. In order to better manage the Bear Creek watershed, the Forest Service initiated the Bear Creek Watershed Restoration Project. Next slide. We've been engaged in a collaborative stakeholder process since 2012, and the collaborative group consisted of hiking groups, motorized users, horseback riding groups, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, the Palmer Land Trust, the Rocky Mountain Field Institute, and the city and the county, El Paso County. And the Forest Service was litigated because we failed to ensure through consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that motorized vehicle use does not jeopardize the continued existence of the greenback cutthroat trout. So we settled, and part of that settlement included immediate closure for motorized use and also doing a watershed assessment, as there were concerns about the vulnerability of the fish. And this prompted us to do an environmental assessment to find a solution to protect the fish while allowing for the appropriate and sustainable recreation in the popular area. The assessment is now complete, and I'll go through what we did, and implementation is underway. Next. So on a sliding scale, for issue complexity, it was really high. Everything really landed on the high end of the sliding scale because there was a high impact to risk of the resource. There's high stakeholder involvement. We've had this collaborative group that's been meeting since 2012, and they meet quarterly. And the level of controversy, potential for litigation is also high. In fact, we'd already been litigated, and that's what kicked off this project. Next slide. So here's an image of the Bear Creek watershed. You can see it's located just west of Colorado Springs, Colorado, which is about just over an hour south of Denver. It's easily accessed by the public, and it's a very high-use area. Everything in green is managed by the Forest Service, and then there's two other landowners that are also within the boundary of this watershed. So the watershed assessment that was done stated several issues. Various user groups have a desire for access, and any closure of roads or trails, both in the short and long term, could restrict that access. The high level of use increases the risk of aquatic invasive species becoming established in the watershed, and existing habitat conditions suggest the need to restore the habitat and reduce sediment input in the stream. So reducing or removing human use from Bear Creek watershed may improve conditions for fish and its habitat. The use and maintenance of the transportation system have the potential to damage or destroy any prehistoric or historic cultural resources. And the trails in this area were some of the original trails that led to the summit of Pikes Peak. So many of them are considered historic. The cost of constructing and maintaining sustainable roads and trails in the watershed with highly erosive soils and threatened fish must be carefully weighed against the benefits of providing for public use on the roads and trails. Land ownership, again, is divided between the Forest Service, the Colorado Springs Utilities, which sold to El Paso County, and the City of Colorado Springs. So any solution that we came up with needed to consider the effects on all landowners and should be coordinated among the landowners, which is why we established the collaborative group. Many of the trails are eroding and contributing sediment into the stream, and so reroute options needed to be explored to move the trail away from the stream and increase the sustainability. And what we ultimately determined is construction of sustainable trails is cheaper in the long term than maintenance and rehabilitation of existing unsustainable trails. Next slide. Here's a map of what the existing trail system was. And the one that kind of goes through the middle is Trail 667 and then goes to 666. That trail is over Bear Creek. And you can see that it crossed the creek several times and ended up right there in the base of that watershed. You can also see that it goes across all the different landowners, which is why we wanted to collaborate together to make decisions about the management holistically. Next slide. Looking at step 2, defining the desired conditions, we looked at several different resources: botany, cultural, hydrology and soils, recreation, and fish and wildlife. For botany, we wanted to make sure that populations of golden columbine would be robust and expanding while being protected from trail users. For cultural, we wanted to make sure the lands were inventoried and cultural resources of significance are identified. And any damage to the historic properties caused by the transportation system, recreational use of the area, or natural sedimentation are mitigated. We wanted to make sure that cultural sites of significance were interpreted for the public to help them become aware of the sensitive resources, because a lot of what we decided to do was move and rehabilitate existing trails, move them out of the watershed. So we want to be able to interpret their historic significance for the public. For hydrology and soils, the erosion and sedimentation is a natural process, but it's been accelerated, and that acceleration due to recreational use leads to water quality impairment, stream channel instability, land loss, and habitat loss. And so we wanted to improve water quality to meet the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment and Forest Plan water quality standards. We also want to manage the transportation system to reduce road and trail hydrologic connectivity and minimize soil erosion and sedimentation. For recreation, the desired future condition is to continue providing opportunities for sustainable motorized and non-motorized recreation while protecting the greenback cutthroat trout in the watershed. We want to reduce the sediment by improving stream habitat complexity and quality, and improve the spawning habitat, the overwintering pool habitat, and the velocity shelters for the fish. And what we found is that some users felt that closing the area to one user group is unjust, and that public lands should be open to all for public use, while others felt like it was an acceptable solution. So there was conflict among the user groups between the motorized, the non-motorized, and the horseback users. And so then other users felt that if the area is closed to one user group, it should be closed to all user groups. And this is what we kept in the back of our mind, because the ranger, the ultimate responsible official for the decision, stated that the easiest thing to do would be to close the area to recreational use if we were truly going to just protect the fish. But that's not the mission of the Forest Service. We're a multi-use agency, and we really wanted to provide the sustainable recreation and use in the area that people love and expected, while also protecting the resource. Next slide. So in the next step, identifying the management strategies, we wanted to design and implement the stream, riparian, and hill slope restoration projects. So for existing trails, this included maintenance, reconstruction, and drainage improvements, physically blocking closed trails and decommissioning them, installing bridges at any stream crossings, and improved signage with this new trail system. For new trails, we're going to construct new trails and install the new trail signs. We had some non-system routes, and we decided to convert 2 trails to system routes and decommission all other system routes. We were going to stabilize High Drive, which is a road that goes through and just above Bear Creek. It's open to hiking, but not open to cars, so bikes and hiking. We're going to install interpretive and regulation signs, and then eliminate helicopter landing zones, which were military landing zones. The Army out of Colorado Springs had a few landing zones, and we were moving them out of the Bear Creek watershed. We also were going to provide consistent management across all 3 land ownerships, because previously we had different decisions that were conflicting. So one is prohibit access to travel off-system routes, prohibit over-snow vehicles, camping, open fires, recreational shooting, and then any domestic animals we're going to prevent from entering or being in Bear Creek and the tributaries. We also implemented a requirement that domestic animals should be leased or harnessed on Bear Creek Trail and one of the new trails, Mount Buckhorn Trail, that we built. Next slide. So here's a map of what we did to implement. The new trails proposed are highlighted in yellow, and then the decommissioned trail is looks almost like a railroad, the black line with the slashes through it were the trails that were decommissioned. The gray trails are the non-system routes that were decommissioned. Next slide. We started implementation last summer, and the trail building is expected to be done in 2 days, actually, July 7th, which is exciting. The signposts and the signs are staged for installation over the next month. A youth corps team will do the final trail work and seeding in mid-July. Rocky Mountain Field Institute will be decommissioning the trails across all 3 landowners, which is fabulous to have one organization working with everybody. El Paso County received a habitat restoration grant from Great Outdoors Colorado to improve the trout habitat in Bear Creek, and consultants will complete stream and bank restoration and increase pool depths in 2018. There was a spawning operation, and it's completed now. 9,800 eggs were fertilized at a fish hatchery with milk collected from Bear Creek. And those eggs, once they're spawned, they are being distributed throughout the state. There's different areas that the state has come up with as just priority areas for trying to reintroduce the trout back to the system across the state. And there's supposed to be an opening ceremony or ribbon cutting July 22nd for the trails. Next slide. For monitoring, what we want to do is determine the effectiveness of trail and in-stream restoration. And we'll utilize a variety of monitoring methods, including V-STAR protocol, photo points, and visual inspection. We'll conduct monitoring after year 1 of implementation and then intermittently as needed. For example, after major rain events or other catastrophic events that could occur in the area, and then determine the need for any retreatment or additional management actions. So we did include some adaptive management in there for retreatment of the trails in the system. If monitoring demonstrates a lack of compliance or any ongoing resource management, we will employ those measures to protect the resource, and most importantly, the greenback cutthroat trout habitat. In the Forest Service, the city and El Paso County plan to meet jointly with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as necessary to review the activities and document compliance, since that was the original reason we were litigated and why the project was started. Next slide. And I just want to say thank you to these organizations: Trails Unlimited, Mile High, Youth Corps, CMTRA, Colorado Mountain Trail Recreation, and I think it's association. It's a motorcycle club that we worked with, the Rocky Mountain Field Institute, and the Palmer Land Trust, as well as the city and the county, and everybody involved with a collaborative group. Collaborative groups, sometimes it takes a lot of effort up front, but it's worthwhile in the end when all partners come together in a joint effort to protect the resource while still allowing for recreational use in the area. And that's the Bear Creek Watershed Restoration Project. Rose and I will open it up to questions.
Thank you very much, Karen. Yes, the idea is to receive questions from all of you. So I'll give a couple of minutes so all of you can share your questions. Remember, in the control panel, there's a section that says questions, and there you can write it down. And I'll be sharing the questions with Karen and Rose. So I'll give you a couple of minutes for that. I want to take this time to remind also everyone that's been here in the webinar that we will be uploading the recording of this webinar, and also at the end of the webinar you will receive a link to a survey to know your opinion about the content, the presentations, and any other ideas you can share so the TAPAS group can organize other webinars. Okay, I'll share the first question that I have here. It's for Karen. From Naseem Sultani from Afghanistan. The question is, you describe your project's desired conditions, including botany, hydrology, and soil quality assurance, recreation, fish and wildlife conservation. As far as they are concerned with your project's monitoring, I'm wondering, how would you measure your indicators? A lot of them sound qualitative indicators. Could you share some more of your perspectives with us? Thank you.
Yes, a lot of them are qualitative. We do have some sediment measures of erosion into Bear Creek, but as far as social trails and the others, the Columbine we're measuring quantitatively. We have numbers of populations and population areas where they exist, and so then qualitatively we'll do social trails, just trying to get to the desired conditions page. And culturally, a lot of the cultural resources, we will have one trail going to some of the old homesteads that were in the area, and we'll interpret those. But then as far as the cultural resources, some of the trails that we're decommissioning, you won't even know they exist. We'll be reseeding those and decommission to prevent the erosion into the water. But then as far as fish, we can do fish counts, we can do water quality measurements, we can do sediment and erosion using a V-STAR protocol, which is quantitative. And then recreation is another qualitative, just providing recreation access and use.
Great, thank you very much, Karen. I've got another question. It's from John Cole. It's for Carrie. It says that based on Carrie said that based on a previous implementation lesson learned, the council developed a sliding scale. What was that lesson? I ask because this kind of thought process seems a function that managers make all the time, asking, is it worth it? How much to invest? If that is true, even though the sliding scale concept has a name now, I'm not clear what the practical added value is.
What an excellent question. This is Carrie. I think as described, the perception from some of the application of the past frameworks were that it was very complicated, that it required a large investment of time and resources, and for many managers, they may ask that question about whether it was worth making that investment. We wanted to, in the new framework, to really explain why each step was really important, no matter where you are on that sliding scale, and to demonstrate through the guidance and case studies how the framework can be applied using different levels of investment of time and resources. So it still requires an investment to go through the process, but we were trying to explain how each step should be geared to the specific needs of the project, and the level of analysis and effort should really be tied to the consequences of the decision that's being made. Our hope will be that that will help managers make that leap of faith that it is worth going through the framework and using it as a tool to guide them through the decision-making process.
Thank you very much, Carrie, for the answer. I've got another question. It is for Rose. It's from Oscar Cambona, and he's asking, who defines the desired condition visitor activities? Is the stakeholder involved at this stage?
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. That's a great question. The desired conditions and the goals and objectives do not necessarily involve stakeholders, although stakeholders have the opportunity to comment on all the content in the project. When we go out for public comment, the goals and objectives that we develop as a part of a project are a part of the content that the public can review and comment on. So if they would want to say, well, you identified this as an area for solitude and natural quiet, but not necessarily this other area that's also ideal, the management team could take that into consideration as well. At Petroglyph, the uniqueness of the partnership between Albuquerque City Open Space and the National Park Service does include stakeholder involvement. So if you considered Albuquerque City Open Space managers as stakeholders, which I would in this case, they're also co-managers, they were involved in all of our workshops to develop and talk through the visitor use management framework. And so in that sense, yes and no.
Thank you very much for the answer. I've got another one from Demir Baric from Croatia, and he's asking, I'm wondering, did you consider the implementation of some kind of survey in order to be more accurate, quantify and scale the indicators on quality of the experience? My viewpoint, it is a key point to start developing reliable indicators. So I'll open it up for Karen or Rose to answer this question.
I have a quick thought. This is Rose. I'll jump in, and then maybe Karen and Carrie both would like to comment. At Petroglyph, Carrie was just mentioning the sliding scale of analysis, and because Petroglyph is fairly moderate on the sliding scale of analysis, we determined that the level of investment needed to understand and the level of investment for data collection was not necessarily a full-on visitor survey. We were able to use existing information such as the TrafX infrared trail counters, as well as the Strava data, which we did purchase from Strava Metro to inform some of the existing conditions. And so for Petroglyph, we didn't necessarily feel like the survey and the amount of time and resources it was going to take to develop that was necessary given the sliding scale of analysis. So I'll offer that, and maybe Karen or Carrie can jump in.
Sure, this is Karen. We also did not do a survey, and part of that was because of the settlement with the litigation. We had to close these trails in the creek to motorized use until we finished the analysis and did the implementation and made a decision to protect the fish. And the motorized user group came to us, and they wanted to help and they wanted to work with us. And so the high level of interest and investment was already there. And so we didn't have to survey them. They were invested in it. We developed a collaborative group and started to work together from the beginning.
Hi, this is Susan. I'll jump in really quick to talk about a little bit of the case study I presented a couple weeks ago on Zion National Park. We did do some original data collection on visitor experience starting in 2003, and then have found the need to do some more collection on visitor perceptions, particularly of crowding along at certain destinations where there are a lot of people, key places that people go to. And like Rose mentioned, we, on the other hand, are on that more complex end of that sliding scale. And so for that situation, it was really deemed appropriate and necessary to not only have more observational data like trail counter numbers and traffic counters, but to also have that visitor perception information as well. So we will be looking at that as one piece of information as we're analyzing all of the information that we have. But I think that Zion is a situation where it was highly complex, and so we're able to really dedicate the funding towards that type of study, but that is often a challenge where we would ideally like to have more of those studies, but is not always possible for us.
And I'll add there that surveying visitors is a complex process for federal land management. We have to go through an approval process in Washington, and so it just lengthens the timeline of a project if we decide to go that route.
Well, thank you very much for all those answers. I think it was very complete, and I'll take another question, and then I'll pass the microphone to Ron Mayer to wrap up. There's several other questions, some of them quite specific, and I just wanted to share with all of you that all your questions are recorded, and we send a report to all the presenters, so maybe we can follow up by email on your questions that are more specific. The question that I have here, the last one, it's also open to everybody, to all the presenters, as well as Carrie and Susan. what do you think about future implementation of the framework using different protected areas worldwide?
This is Carrie, and I'll share a thought, and I think Susan will add on. But you know, we're very excited about the idea that the framework could be useful in all across the world, and at all levels of government, even here in the U.S. We of course built the framework for the federal agencies, but really kept in mind that it might be used much more broadly than that, and we would hope. We consider the framework edition 1. There's also opportunity to continually refine the framework as we learn more, and applying it in other countries may be part of how we continue to learn to make it most useful for the widest audience. And with that, I'll turn it to Susan.
One of the projects our office and the Forest Service have been involved with for a while is working with the Brazilian government on their protected areas and applying a different planning framework that we have for their management plans, their general management plans. And something that we see as a potential with this visitor use management framework is that as they're building on that planning need for their general management, for their conservation units, that we could apply this visitor use management framework in more tiered plans that would more specifically look at visitor use. So that's something that we're having conversations right now, and hoping that we might be able to test that out and see how that can help them think more specifically on visitor use management.
And this is Karen. As a council member, I think I'd be really excited to see this broadened worldwide, and have some council members assist on implementing and engaging with staff across the world on visitor use.
Well, thanks again for all the questions as well as all the answers from our presenters. And I'll pass the microphone to Ron Mader to wrap up the webinar. At the end of Ron's intervention, just so you know, the webinar will be closed and you will receive our survey to share with us all your comments, all your questions. If they weren't answered just now, because there were a lot, we'll share them with the presenters. Okay, so Ron, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Alan, it's so good to hear your voice. Alan's an old friend and Colibri winner, and he's put together these 2 wonderful webinars. So on behalf of TAPAS, the Tourism and Protected Area Specialist Group, many thanks for putting this together. Special thanks to the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. That is a mouthful. And one quick question I want to just jut in with following up on Alan's point. Is there any overlap with this week's World Heritage Committee meeting in Poland? For those of you looking at international connections.
I don't know of any. This is Karen. I don't know. Carrie, do you?
No, I'm not sure of any direct connection.
Okay, well, we're going to throw it up on the web and try to see if we can connect some of the people working with tourism and parks at these events. And I strongly welcome TAPAS membership from the folks that you're working with. You're all dealing with great partners, and I want to thank you again for your time. This has been a fantastic webinar. Alan, you put it together so well. And the content again was first rate. So we'll be doing our deep dive and getting those links out and looking at how this is put into practice in the field. So thank you very much.